Hey folks, this is Kalani. With the Dragonflight expansion just around the corner, I keep getting asked the same question over and over again. Which classes look good? Who has the best talent trees? Who's coming out on top? Which classes got nerfed too much? What is the best class in Dragonflight so far? And while that is an incredibly loaded question, we've done our best to try and answer it. So here's what we think. The top 3 classes going into Dragonflight and the class that we think beats all others. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Alrighty, we're going to start with number 3 and work our way up to the best class in Dragonflight. The third best class to play in Dragonflight, in our opinion, is going to be the Hunters. Hunters are almost hands down the single best class for solo content and for ease of play. They're relatively straightforward, they have so many fantastic options for simply staying alive or avoiding damage, and they can kick out a lot of damage while having full mobility for the most part. There's a reason why Hunters usually get assigned to mechanics in raids, is because they can handle them so well without sacrificing any damage, especially if you're rocking the Beast Mastery specialization. But a lot of the solo potential comes down to their pet. No matter which spec you choose, you have the option of working alongside your trusty pet companions. There are so many options in the general talent tree that buff up your pet, or just let you keep it alive for way longer in every scenario. So whether you're soloing a tough elite out in the world, working through old raids, or just doing some lazy questing, having your pet take all of the aggro and being able to easily keep your pet alive and to redirect your aggro onto your pet as well, it makes everything so easy. Not only are they raid mechanic gods and solo content heroes, they're going to bring a lot to the table, no matter which spec you decide to run. They have good mobility, strong defensive cooldowns, a rather unique immunity, a single target stun with your pet, an AoE stun with binding shot. They can also sort of stealth, and they can allow your group to ignore line of sight briefly, which is a bit interesting, and then they also bring a nice amount of burst AoE damage almost no matter which spec you decide to go. So that's the kind of general stuff a Hunter is going to bring to the table, but what about specializations? Well, Beast Mastery has changed quite a bit, but it keeps the same kind of flavor and playstyle. You have your main pet, you can talent for an additional pet, and you can talent further for summoning more and more beasties to your side to ravage your foes. There are a few different ways to build a Beast Mastery Hunter. You can focus on empowering your favorite pet as much as possible, or you can work on summoning an entire zoo to show everyone who the true Beastmaster is. They have great single target potential, very strong AoE burst and sustained damage thanks to some of the changes, and they're shaping up to be a very powerful spec overall. Thanks to the huge focus on their pets, Beast Mastery Hunters are also probably the single best solo content spec in the game, so whether you want an easier time questing or grinding mobs or working on some older content, you can't really beat a Beast Mastery Hunter. Now, marksmanship keeps many of the same tools and options as previous expansions, they're just going to be slapped into the talent tree instead, so if you've played an Hunter recently, you know how this goes. Wind up those huge aimed shots to chunk your foe's health, and trick shot them to hit multiple targets while rapid firing off a sweet chain of attacks. They have good burst, great cleave potential, and they have so many different tools to pick and choose from. It's going to be fun making and playing around with different talent builds for different situations. They aren't quite as mobile as Beast Mastery Hunters, but when you get the hang of aimed shots and their timing, it's really not too bad. An interesting point for marksmanship is that they do typically prefer to not use a pet with the lone wolf talent, so if the pet management isn't something you like, or you just prefer to be a lone ranger with your trusty bow or gun, marksman fills that role quite nicely, but you do always have the option of calling a pet out just in case you need that extra help or extra tankiness while dealing with something out in the world. And then survival is a bit of a wild card, as survival has been since the changeover to being a melee. You're up close and personal with a staff or pointy stick, and you have lots of bombs to throw around. It can be a lot of fun and quite satisfying when you see the numbers roll in. They should have good cleave potential and some very strong burst with Mongoose bite stacks. I think both marksmanship and beast mastery will probably be the better spec choices overall. They're shaping up quite a bit better and they have more reliable damage, but the great thing about survival is that it does give you that melee option. Sometimes you want to get up close and personal when stabbing your enemies with a long pointy stick, and you get to hang out with your pet in melee too, but sometimes you really need that ranged option. Whether it's a certain mythic plus affix or maybe a particularly nasty raid boss, having the option of melee and ranged on one character is always a huge advantage, so that's another reason why Hunters pull ahead of some other classes right now. So if you're looking for an easy class to play with great results for all types of content, including soloing stuff, Hunters are a fantastic class to pick up and play. Hunter has been my main for the majority of my playtime in WoW at this point, and I always at least level it up in every expansion. Now with all that being said, I do think there are 2 classes that are arguably better than Hunters going into Dragonflight, so that's why they only made it into the 3rd spot. So, moving on, in second place on this list we have the Evokers. Evokers are the brand new class coming in the Dragonflight expansion, and they've definitely earned their spot on this list. They're very fun to play, they have some new mechanics, and a lot of flavour and fantasy overall. One of the major selling points of the Evoker class is that they are the new kid on the block. We haven't had a new class since Demon Hunters were introduced back in Legion, so it's been a while since we've been able to play with something completely fresh and new. That's always incredibly fun in my opinion, and each new class has seemingly had more interesting mechanics and gameplay when compared to previous ones. For example, Evokers have empowered spells. You can charge them up to different ranks to unleash different effects. What's interesting about this is that a longer charge isn't always necessarily the best option. Sometimes you want to fire them off at a lower charge, but if you can hold still for the full duration of the charge, that could end up being better. It all depends on your current situation, which means you're going to have to think about when you want to use which empower abilities and at what charge level. They also have deep breath abilities. There's one for damage and one for healing, so no matter what kind of Evoker you're playing, you'll be able to soar across the battlefield, devastating your enemies or providing aid to your allies. Evokers also have fantastic mobility. This is one of their strongest traits. They can zip around the battlefield, they can cast while moving, and they can even provide a big movement bonus to your entire party or raid through talent, and they have a raid-wide buff that reduces the cooldown of everyone else's mobility spells as well. Between the various hops and jumps and those crazy long deep breath abilities, an Evoker will never be caught out of place. To add to that, they can bring an AoE root, an AoE slow, an AoE stun, an AoE knockup, and an AoE knockback. They also have the ability to pick up and reposition friendly players, and they also have a bloodlust spell, so they bring quite a lot to the table. Now, a DPS Evoker, or Devastation Evoker, will be focusing on using the powers of the red Dragonflight and blue Dragonflight to decimate their enemies. The red side of the talent tree focuses a lot on AoE effects, dealing damage to multiple enemies multiple times to really get those big AoE numbers flowing. On the blue side, things are more single target focused, but there's actually quite a few options to let your abilities hit multiple targets, so you can mix and match to unleash a flurry of red and blue Dragonflight magic to destroy anything that tries to stand against you. For the healing side of things, Evokers will channel the power of the green Dragonflight and the bronze Dragonflight. The green side gives them lots of direct heals with very cool visual effects with more AoE options. The bronze side gives them time effects like heals over time, damage reduction over time, and even copying your own spells for greater effects. It's really interesting and feels very smooth to play. You'll be dashing around to allies, maybe even carrying allies to safety, throwing down some awesome AoE heals, and generally being a very mobile healer, being exactly where you need to be right in the nick of time. Now, there is something interesting about the Evoker class that no one else really has to think about. Evokers can only be one race, the new Dracthea race, and the Dracthea race can only be the Evoker class. This means that essentially all Dracthea racials are actually Evoker abilities as well, which is important because the Dracthea have some crazy racials in Dragonflight. To start with, they have the AoE knockup with Tail Swipe. This could be useful to keep things in place, interrupt spellcasting, and generally just provide some interference. They also have a knockback with Wing Buffet. This kind of utility is usually something you have to talent into, like Typhoon, but Dracthea Evokers get it for free. Now, those racials are nice and all, but where Evokers will really shine are with Gathering Professions. I actually think Evokers could be the best Gathering Profession class in the game. Hear me out. To start with, we have the Soar racial, and I think this is going to be a little underrated. Essentially, you get to dragon ride without actually having to get on your mount. Now, while you're questing and generally adventuring, this is pretty cool, but it's even better for gathering. The main reason is due to your dragon riding vigor. During normal play, especially after you've progressed a little bit through the dragon riding talents, you probably won't run out of vigor too much. But with gathering, you are constantly in the air, dropping down, picking something up, going back up, using that vigor, going dot to dot on your map, so you'll probably be running out of vigor quite a lot. That's where Soar really shines. You can zoom on over to your next node without using your vigor, so it helps you fill in the gaps and you won't have to run around on the ground quite as much, because the only way to regenerate vigor is simply to not use dragon riding for a little while. So you're going to be stuck on the ground running from node to node, whereas a Dracthea can just hop into the air every 3 or 4 minutes, whatever your cooldown is going to be, and that's going to help you save vigor and get to nodes much faster. But it goes one step further. Dragonflight introduces new profession-specific stats. One of these stats is Perception, which increases the chance for you to find rare materials while gathering. Sounds useful, right? Well, Drakthea evokers get 2% Perception for free as a racial with their discerning eye, so a Drakthea always has a higher chance to get rare materials while gathering. So if you're looking for an alt to take both mining and herbalism for that sweet, sweet gathering gold, evokers might be the perfect pick, so that's something else to consider. All in all, evokers are shaping up to be a fun and exciting new addition to the class roster of World of Warcraft, and they will be well worth playing in Dragonflight. And then our top spot, our best class in Dragonflight, it has to go to the Druids this time around. Druids are the single most flexible class in World of Warcraft. They are the only class in the game that can play as any role. They can tank, heal, melee DPS, and range DPS. They can do it all. So with so many changes coming through in Dragonflight, this also means that Druids get a lot of updates to work with, thanks to having 4 specializations. And I can say that at least 3 of the 4 specs are looking good going into Dragonflight, with interesting and very talented trees to work with and play around with. Let's start with the balance spec. Boomkins have a great set of tools in their arsenal this time around with some fantastic changes in their spec talent tree. Out of every borrowed power system and feature that we've had over the last few expansions, it seems like Boomkins got the vast majority of their really strong and popular powers. We have Arcanic Pulsar, Balance of All Things, Power of Goldrin, Rattle the Stars and Starweaver, we've got Starlord, and then even Convoke the Spirits. It's a grand collection of power-ups for you to pick and choose between, and I think Balanced Druids ended up with a really good talent tree. That leads them to have interesting options to play around and various ways to focus their build. You get to choose how powerful your eclipses can be and which kind of effects it will trigger. You can stack your damage into single target or AoE, and there are so many options for generating extra astral power to keep those star surges and starfalls flowing. There's also the interesting change of eclipse no longer being cyclic, so you aren't forced into going back and forth. You can prioritize an eclipse effect depending on the content you're doing, and starfall will once again stack instead of simply refreshing its duration, so we can call down an entire meteor storm of starfalls, making Balanced Druids the spread AoE damage gods once again. I seriously doubt any class or spec will come close to Balanced Druids in any encounter with spread out adds. Starfall is going to be incredibly powerful and fun. They have great burst, they have great sustained damage, and they're really fun to play. What's not to love? Moving on to Feral Druids, I have been very pleasantly surprised in Dragonflight. Feral Druids have actually managed to carve out this interesting bleed niche, and I feel like they've been trying to get to this point for so long. There are so many great talent choices for Feral, giving them multiple options for helping them to manage their energy. They can generate extra combo points and choose where to focus their damage when spending combo points. You can ramp up single target damage, you can focus more into bleeds, and you also have some amazing AoE potential. There are options to apply Rip as an AoE, you can deal portions of that Rip damage instantly for even more damage, and you can even apply Rake to 2 targets at a time. It's almost like they got everything they wanted or needed to really shine in this expansion. There's also quite a bit of depth to the spec, so if you're looking for something that requires a bit of brain work and you actually see potentially massive payoffs for managing everything correctly, Feral is a great spec for that. They have good single target damage, amazing AoE, and they have great utility and self-sustain thanks to being a hybrid class. So you should have no problems with outdoor content or solo content, and then looking to be a top tier melee DPS overall. So with Feral in such a good spot, that means that both Druid DPS specs should do very well in Dragonflight, which also means you can freely swap between them for different situations and really maximize your Druid's potential. Almost no one else in the game can go from range to melee and back again while dominating the charts as either role. Now, Restoration Druids are keeping their heal over time niche and ramping it up to 100. I think they're really going to excel in Dragonflight, both in raids and dungeons. Thanks to the larger boss areas with spread out encounter spaces, some of which have a lot of movement and even split groups, heal over time effects are really going to shine, and a Resto Druid's innate mobility, thanks to their many useful instant casts, will help them a lot more than the other less mobile classes. For dungeons, they can keep the entire group alive while putting out some good damage and providing crazy utility in one very neat little package. Resto Druids can kind of do it all. They have great stacked AoE healing, good spread healing, they have some quick instant heals, as well as a low cooldown external. They have good defensives and self-sustain options, as well as solid throughput and raid cooldowns. And if you ever wanted to go the extra mile, you can get into cat weaving, which lets resto druids kick out a crazy amount of DPS while keeping everyone alive. And then we come to guardian druids. This is actually the spec that most druids are not too happy with, partly because the current setup isn't exactly ideal or super new or interesting, and partly because they were one of the first to see talent trees in the beta, but one of the least changed talent trees overall. That definitely doesn't feel great. There is so much feedback for guardian druids specifically, and none of it has been acted upon, but that's probably where the dev team just ran out of time. The good news here is that guardian druids should be one of the first specs in line to see some big change-ups with their talent tree after the game has launched, either in a smaller early update or with the first major patch of the expansion. So there is still hope, we just have to wait a little bit. Thankfully, in that interim, Guardian Druids should still perform very well as a tank. They have good base mitigation, they should still be thrashing their way to victory, and they also bring all that wonderful Druid utility. Guardian Druids should be a fantastic tank in Dragonflight, it's just a bit disappointing they didn't get a lot of attention during the talent tree changes. I really hope they get some love sooner rather than later and turn into the monster tank we know all Druids can be. Druids are also going to bring a fantastic amount of utility to any group they join. They have a raid and party-wide versatility buff, they have a battle res, every Druid has access to Innovate to help out your healers, there's a hard CC with Cyclone, a sleep crowd control, a knockback, mass roots, Ursul's Vortex, and perhaps most importantly Stampeding Roar, an AoE speed boost for your entire party or raid that can be talented down to a 1 minute cooldown. That is going to be insanely useful. So almost no matter what kind of playstyle you prefer, Druids have something for everyone, and most of their specs are interesting and fun. And with Dragonflight being such a breath of fresh air, I'm actually very excited to play a class that has so many options, and that's why our best class for Dragonflight are the Druids. And there we have it, the best classes in Dragonflight so far in our opinion, and why. Would you agree with us based on what you know or what you've played in the beta? Are there any other classes that you think deserve to be on this list? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to everyone subscribed on Twitch. You can see the names flitting by on screen. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.